Picture retirement. Not your retirement. Not anyone you know's retirement. Not the version with the pension, the savings account, the carefully planned exit from working life. Picture what retirement looked like for most people who ever lived on this earth. There's no pension. There's no state support. There's no gold watch. No farewell party. No speech. There's just a day, usually unremarkable, usually cold, when your body simply stops being able to do the thing it has done every single day for 50 or 60 years. And after that day, there is nothing. No income, no safety net, nothing between you and starvation except the mercy of neighbours who don't have much to spare, a daughter who can't feed another mouth, and a parish overseer who looks at your hands, cracked, swollen, the knuckles the size of walnuts, and asks whether you have anything left worth selling. That's retirement for the working poor of 18th-century England. Not a phase of life, just the end. For most of human history, the working poor didn't retire. They worked until they couldn't. And when they couldn't, one of three things happened. Their family supported them, their parish gave them a few coins to survive on, or they entered the workhouse. And if you don't know what a workhouse is, you're about to find out, in considerable detail, in a way that may make your own bed feel significantly more comfortable than it did 20 minutes ago. I make these history stories, and honestly, I never quite know whether people actually sleep to them, or whether you're all just people who find it mysteriously soothing to hear about how badly things could have gone. Either way, get comfortable. Pull the blanket up. Because tonight we're going somewhere most history books skip over with polite speed. We're going to 1782, London, Whitechapel, and we're going there as someone who has worked every single day since the age of 8. Here we go. You're 68 years old. That's the first thing to understand, not because 68 is ancient. By our standards it isn't, not even close. But because of what 68 means in a body that has done what your body has done. Your hands tell the story better than any doctor could. They are swollen at the knuckles. The skin is cracked in a dozen places, and not gently cracked. Cracked the way old leather cracks, deep, all the way down to the pink wet underneath. In winter, which is now, those cracks bleed. Not dramatically. Not rivers of blood, just a slow, quiet seeping that stains everything you touch. You've learned to wrap them at night with strips of old linen, which helps slightly. Not much, not enough. They've looked this way for years. Your hands. The way they look is what they are. Your back is the second thing. You can't stand fully straight anymore, not since about 2 years ago, when something in your lower spine decided it had absorbed enough and was done with the arrangement. You can straighten if you concentrate, if you brace against a wall and take 3 slow, deliberate breaths and force your spine into alignment. But the moment your attention goes elsewhere, you curve forward again. Like a tree that has spent so many years arguing with the prevailing wind that it has finally just decided to agree. Your feet are a separate chapter. 60 years on stone floors, 60 years of wet shoes and no shoes, and shoes that had been resoled so many times the original leather was more legend than material. Your left toe locks sometimes, mid-step, just stops. You've learned to shuffle drag it forward, to convince it to continue. Usually it cooperates. Usually. None of this is unusual. None of it is remarkable. This is not a story of exceptional suffering. This is just what 68 looks like when you've spent 60 years as a laundress in Whitechapel. Your name is Margaret Holt. You were born in this parish, the parish of St. Mary, Whitechapel, in the year 1714. You have lived in Whitechapel your entire life. You know these streets the way you know your cracked hands, every scar, every variation, every section that's gotten worse with time. You live on Vine Court, which sounds grander than it is. It's an alley, really, a narrow passage running off Whitechapel High Street, with 4-storey tenements leaning slightly toward each other on either side, the way buildings in crowded neighbourhoods lean over time, as if they've been having a long conversation and have finally decided to close the distance. Your room is on the 3rd floor, one room, 10 feet by 12, if you're being generous with the measuring, and there's no reason to be generous. A fireplace that draws badly and smokes when the wind comes from the east, which it does, constantly, all winter. A window with one cracked pane you stopped arguing with 3 winters ago. A bed, which is to say a straw mattress on a low wooden frame, the straw compressed and slightly damp-smelling. A table, 2 stools, a chest. That's it. That's what 60 years of honest work looks like when you're standing in the middle of it and taking an inventory. 3 weeks ago, on a Monday morning in November, you dropped a basket. That's the whole thing. That's the moment that divides one part of your life from the other. You were standing in the wash-house behind Mrs. Caldwell's establishment on Aldgate High Street. A good account, one of your better ones. 4 adults, 2 children, a considerable and regular quantity of household linen, and you had just finished wringing out a set of tablecloths. Your hands had been working the wringing motion for 50-odd minutes. The tablecloths were heavy with water, the way wet linen always is, pulling at the tendons in your fingers, at the joints of your wrists, at the muscles of your forearms that had been for 60 years adequate to this task. You reached for the basket to carry it to the drying line, and your hands let go, not from pain, not from a dramatic twinge or a sudden failure. They simply released, the way a hand releases something when the grip has finally run out of intention. Like they'd been holding on without your help for a while and had decided without consulting you that they were finished. The basket hit the stone floor of the wash-house. Wet tablecloth splashed across the flagstones. Water went everywhere. The sound of it, that heavy wet slap of soaked linen on cold stone, echoed off the brick walls. You stood there for a moment, looking down at it. Your hands were still curved in the shape of the basket handle, still bent around the memory of carrying something, but empty. It took you 3 attempts to crouch down. The 3rd attempt, you braced one hand against the side of the copper tub and lowered yourself with an effort that was audible. Your knees making a sound like ice cracking on the Thames in January, a sound that used to embarrass you and has since moved into the category of just something that happens. You were still on the floor gathering wet linen by handfuls when Mrs. Caldwell appeared in the doorway. She's not an unkind woman, Mrs. Caldwell. You should be clear about that. She has a good, plain, honest face, and she's never once cheated you on a payment in 6 years of accounts, which is more than you can say for several of the women you've worked for over 6 decades. She stood in that doorway, and she looked at you on the floor with your swollen hands and your curved back and your slow gathering of wet linen, and her expression did something complicated. Not disgust, not cruelty, pity, which is, in certain circumstances, worse than either. "Margaret," she said, "just getting it sorted, you said." Your voice was steady. You were proud of that. "Margaret, I think—" "2 minutes, Mrs. Caldwell. I'm fine." She let you finish, let you get to your feet, let you hang the tablecloths, let you complete that Monday's wash, and then, as you were leaving, she pressed your payment into your hand, the usual 3 shillings, and held it a moment too long. "I've been thinking," she said, "about hiring someone to help. A girl, someone younger." She paused. "She's 17. She didn't say, to replace you. She didn't have to." "Of course," you said. You walked back through Aldgate toward Whitechapel, with the wind off the river finding every gap in your clothes, and you thought clearly, without drama, without the luxury of panic. 3 shillings from Mrs. Caldwell, gone. 1 shilling and 6 pence from Mrs. Pemberton on Leman Street, who's been giving your work to her niece since September, already gone. 2 shillings from the public house on Commercial Road, which went when the new landlord's wife decided to do it herself, gone since October. That leaves the Barton family on Plummer's Row, 1 shilling a week, and whatever piecework you can still take in at home, washing small items in your room, hanging them on the line you've rigged across the window. Your rent is 1 shilling and 8 pence. 1 shilling from the Bartons minus 1 shilling 8 for rent. You're already 8 pence in deficit before you've spent a farthing on food. You stood on the corner of Whitechapel High Street with 3 shillings in your hand that you knew were among the last you would earn, and you did the mathematics of your situation. And the mathematics were not complicated, and they were not kind. Here is something that takes a moment to understand about poverty in 18th century England. It wasn't that the working poor were bad at saving. It wasn't that they drank their wages or failed to plan or couldn't think ahead. Some did, many didn't. But the fundamental problem was not character. The fundamental problem was arithmetic. A laundress in 1780s London, working steadily, with good accounts, not a sick week, not a slow season, everything going correctly, could earn 5 to 8 shillings a week in the busy period. In winter, 4 shillings was reasonable, 3 was normal, 2 shillings in a difficult week was not unusual. Your rent, 1 shilling and 8 pence. Food for 1 person at the absolute minimum. Coarse bread, a little salt, occasionally a bone to make broth, a herring when you could afford it. 2 shillings, if you were careful, if you skipped meals when the choice arose between eating and paying the landlady. Coal. London winters are real winters, the kind of cold that gets into stone walls and doesn't leave until May. Coal at 6 shillings a bushel. You need at least a bushel to heat a single room through a winter week if you want to stay warm enough to sleep without waking with ice-stiff fingers. That's 6 pence a day. You can't afford 6 pence a day. You burn less than you need. You go to bed wearing your work dress and a wool coat. You stop thinking of warmth as something you're entitled to. Shoes, candles, the dentist. Except you don't go to the dentist because the dentist costs money. So you wait until the tooth becomes intolerable, and then you find a barber surgeon and you pay whatever it takes and you go without something else for a month. Medicine. The ongoing small catastrophes of maintenance. In a good week, a truly good week, you might end the 7 days with 2 or 3 pennies that you don't immediately owe to someone. 2 or 3 pennies. A modest annuity that would generate just 1 shilling a week, just 1 shilling, costs approximately £30 to purchase from one of the annuity companies that wealthy merchants use to secure their old age. You would need to save your entire surplus, every penny, every single week, for 30 years, without spending anything extra, replacing nothing, enduring everything to afford that annuity. 30 years of perfect economy, while your hands are in lie. This is why the working poor didn't save for retirement, not because they couldn't think ahead, because the numbers made thinking ahead a kind of obscene mathematical joke. Your husband Thomas understood numbers. He was a coal heaver. one of the men who carried the coal from the river barges to the boats to the cellars of the city. Back-breaking work, black work, work that paid reasonably for its kind. 12 or 14 shillings a week when the ships were in. He kept a small tin under the floorboard. He called it the emergency, and he meant it literally. When the surplus existed, he put a farthing or a halfpenny in. Over 25 years of marriage, he saved £3, 4 shillings and 9 pence. When he died, 3 years ago, 59 years old, lungs gone to coal dust, coughing until there was nothing left to cough. The emergency paid for his burial. A plain wooden coffin. A plot in the churchyard. The grave digger. The fee for the clerk to record it. £3, 4 shillings, 9 pence. Gone in a week. And then it was just you. Your daughter Sarah lives in Bermondsey, across the river, married to a journeyman shoemaker named Joseph Draper. 5 children, all living, which in Bermondsey in 1782 is a kind of small miracle. Joseph earns perhaps 10 shillings when the trade is good. They live in 2 rooms. They eat bread and cheese and a piece of salt pork on Sundays. When you told Sarah about Mrs. Caldwell, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You could come to us, mother." What she meant was, "You could sleep on our floor. You could share bread that is not enough already. You could sit in the corner while my 5 children climb over you, and my husband, who is a kind man but who's exhausted by the time he comes home, would make you feel welcome in the way that a person makes you feel welcome when they have no room for you but are trying their absolute best. You love Sarah more than you can put into words. You told her you'd manage. The parish of St. Mary Whitechapel has been caring for its poor, or in some cases managing and sorting and occasionally warehousing its poor, since the Poor Law Act of 1601. That's 181 years before the Monday morning in November, when you push through the iron gate in the churchyard wall and make your way to the vestry office where the overseer of the poor keeps his accounts. You've walked past that gate hundreds of times. You've never walked through it. There is a specific quality to doing something you have spent your entire adult life making sure you would never have to do. You can feel it in your chest as you approach the vestry door. Not guilt exactly. You've done nothing wrong. You've worked honestly and completely for 60 years. You know this. But something in the same neighbourhood as guilt. A knowledge of distance between the person you always meant to be and the person standing here. The overseer of the poor is a man named Joshua Peake, a stationer's supplier, shop on Petticoat Lane, solid man with reddish mutton chop whiskers and the manner of someone who considers himself a good Christian and means it in the most procedurally inconvenient way possible. He's not cruel, he's thorough, which, when you're on the receiving end of thoroughness, amounts to roughly the same experience. He asks you to sit. The chair on your side of his desk is low and slightly unstable, and faces the window, so that the grey November light falls directly in your eyes. You don't think this is deliberate. You don't think anything about this room, this arrangement, is deliberately designed to make you feel diminished. It's just how the furniture has always sat, and the furniture happens to diminish you. He dips his pen. Name: Margaret Holt, widow. Age: 68. Previous occupation: laundress, since I was 8 years old. He looks up at that. A pause. Since 8 years old, he says. Yes, sir. He writes it down. You have the impression he has noted it in a column where he puts things that are somewhat remarkable, but entirely irrelevant to the matter before him. The questions continue. Your husband, any property, any savings? The question he asks in the same gentle professional tone as all the others, Any jewellery, plate or items of value that might be sold? I have my husband's coat, you say. Wool, it's warm. I've been wearing it this winter. He looks at the coat. He makes a note. He doesn't say whether you can keep it. Family. One daughter, Bermondsey. Her husband is a journeyman shoemaker. They have 5 children. And she cannot support you. She has 5 children and 2 rooms, he writes. He writes for some time. Mrs. Holt, he says finally, the parish provides outdoor relief to persons in your situation. Money paid directly to you, collected here weekly. The current rate for a widow of your age, without family support, is 1 shilling and 6 pence per week, plus a weekly allowance of bread. 1 shilling and 6 pence. Your rent is 1 shilling and 8 pence. That won't cover my rent, you say carefully. No, he says, it won't. Many recipients find it necessary to make other arrangements with regard to accommodation. He pauses, chooses his next words. There is also the option of indoor relief. Indoor relief. The workhouse. Not yet, you say. He nods. He's heard this. He's heard it 1,000 times and he knows exactly what follows it. You'll need to present yourself here each Friday. Relief is paid here. Miss 2 consecutive Fridays without word, the relief stops automatically. He closes the ledger. Is there anything else, Mrs. Holt? There are 40 things. None of them are things Joshua Peake can help you with. No, you say. Thank you, sir. You walk back through the churchyard with 1 shilling and 6 pence in your pocket and a bread voucher in your hand, and you stand on the Whitechapel Road in the raw November wind, and you do the mathematics again. 1 shilling 6 minus 1 shilling 8, already a deficit, before a single piece of bread. You've been trying not to think about the life before. Thinking about it is a form of self-indulgence you can't afford right now. But here is what the life before actually was. Here is what 60 years of it felt like from the inside, because some things deserve to be said clearly before they go unrecorded. Monday was always the worst. The wash-house on Vine Court, where you worked for 20 years before you had enough accounts to work from clients' premises directly, was a low-ceilinged building with 3 coppers and a stone floor and a drain that never worked completely. The drain meant water pooled near the window. That pooled water mixed with lye and grease and the human residue of whatever had been washed in a space with inadequate ventilation holding 5 or 6 women doing heavy work. That was the smell of Monday morning. That was the smell of your working life. Lye is made from wood ash steeped in water. The resulting liquid is alkaline. Add it to a washing copper and it loosens grease, breaks down dirt, strips away what doesn't belong on clean linen. It also strips away the outer layers of human skin if you keep your hands in it long enough. Your hands were in it for 50 years. The first thing it does is redden you. Then the skin thickens, which sounds like protection, like the body fortifying itself, but isn't. What it means is the skin is trying to compensate for damage already done. Then the cracking. Then, after enough years, cracking is simply the baseline state of your hands. You stop thinking of it as injury and start thinking of it as how you are. Inside, the joints don't announce themselves as clearly. The knuckles, the small bones of the wrist. The lie works there more slowly, year by year, invisible, until one morning you reach for something and understand without drama that your hands are keeping a secret from you. The weight was the other part of it. A wet sheet weighs 8 pounds, a wet wool blanket 12 or 15, a set of table linens for a large household dinner, 12 covers, tablecloth, napkins, wet and ready to wring, £30 or more. You'd wring, hang, check, wring again, carry baskets, fold. The folding was almost pleasant in a certain light. The warm, clean smell of dried linen, the way a well-pressed sheet whispered against itself as you folded, the ironing. In a good wash-house, in your middle years, you'd use a box iron, a hollow iron filled with hot coals, pressed over the fabric while you checked every few minutes that the coals were still live. In simpler situations, flat irons heated directly on the fire, 2 at a time, always one heating while you used the other, the heat radiating up through the cloth you wrapped around the handle, the constant low-level burn in your fingertips that you stopped noticing somewhere around your late 20s. Hours of it, arms extended, the weight pressing down on the fabric, the steam rising when the hot iron met the damp cloth, that sharp, clean smell, brief and honest, the smell of something being put right. You loved that smell, just that one moment, the clean steam rising off a well-pressed sheet. In summer, the wash-house was an oven. Coppers boiling, irons heating, a dozen women in a space meant for half of them, the windows opaque with steam. You'd wring out your apron at noon and it would be wet again inside the hour. In winter, your fingers went red, then white, then numb, which meant you couldn't feel whether the iron was running too hot until it scorched through fine linen, and you'd spend the rest of the day calculating how many hours of work it would take to pay for the damage. You became capable of reading fabric the way a physician reads a patient. The texture, the weave, the weight, the specific way different materials responded to heat and water. Fine lawn like an injured bird, minimum water, lightest iron, heavy wool like a problem to be solved by force, Holland cloth forgiving, silk a trap, one wrong touch, and you left a mark that wouldn't come out, and you were paying for someone's gown with a week's wages. Thomas used to say your hands knew more than your head. He wasn't wrong. Thomas Holt, 12 years older than you. You married in 1738, both of you already carrying your working lives in your bodies, his in his chest, the early coal dust cough already settled in his lungs by your wedding day. You'd built what you could, which was modest but was real. This room, this careful small existence, a tin under the floorboard, he'd come home from the wharves black with coal dust, the darkness sitting in the lines of his face, the creases of his knuckles, the fine network of wrinkles around his eyes, a darkness he could never fully wash away. He'd wash carefully every evening, with particular attention to those creases. They never quite came clean. He'd accepted this philosophically, the way he accepted most practical things. The cough began its serious business about 5 years before the end, not all at once. The way coal dust fills lungs, steadily, grain by grain, imperceptibly. Then one morning you realise you've stopped hearing it. You've been hearing it so long it's joined the background noise of your life, like traffic, or bells. And then you start hearing it again, and that's when you understand. His last month, he couldn't leave the bed. You washed his sheets every other day. You have kept his coat. Here is something worth understanding clearly. In 1782 London, wealthy people did not worry about old age. Not because they lived forever. They didn't. Old age found them the same way it finds everyone. Found their joints, their eyesight, their capacity for sustained effort. But the difference between an old age with money and an old age without it was not a difference of degree. It was the difference between a life that remained a life and a situation that was, essentially a slow and managed end. A wealthy merchant in his 60s could purchase an annuity, a contract with a financial company that would pay him a regular income for the rest of his life, in exchange for a lump sum investment now, poorly regulated by modern standards but functional. A man with £400-500 to invest could secure £30 or £40 a year, enough for comfortable rooms, a servant, coal, food, medicine, the small dignities that distinguish living from enduring. A prosperous tradesman, not wealthy but established, 30 years of honest trade behind him, could sell that business and retire on the proceeds. He might have a house he owned, sons who had followed him into trade and who felt, by the moral standards of the time, a genuine obligation to support their father. A gentleman of the professional class, a lawyer, a clergyman with a good living, a physician, worked in a reduced capacity into his 60s, and when he stopped there were savings and property and investments. None of that was available to you. None of it was within imaginable distance of you. And here is what the age thought about that. The dominant philosophy of poor relief in 18th century England was not at its core compassionate. It was managerial. The poor existed, had always existed, would always exist. The question was not how to eliminate poverty. That wasn't seriously considered. But how to manage the poor efficiently, at minimum cost to the parishes who bore the burden. The philosophical underpinning spoken calmly from pulpits and in pamphlets, and in the conversations of men who considered themselves thoughtful. Poverty in most cases resulted from improvidence, from idleness, from moral weakness. A person who had worked hard and saved and lived virtuously would not, generally, find themselves in this position. The fact that you are here was, in some sense, not said cruelly usually, but embedded in the assumptions of every form you signed, every examination you underwent, evidence of your own failure. You think about this sometimes. You think about the lye and the wet wool and the stone floors and Thomas's tin with £3 4 9 in it after 25 years of deliberate care. You think about the men with clean hands and clean ink-stained fingers, sitting in warm offices, explaining to you that poverty is a character flaw. You know better than to say this out loud, but you know it. It's in your hands. It's been there for 50 years. Anne Ridley lived below you for 11 years. Former needle worker, fine stitching on hat bands and brims, work that required excellent close vision, which it eventually took from her the way such work always does, year by year in poor light until the sharpness she needed was simply gone. When her eyes failed, she did what you're doing now. Odd jobs, cleaning, outdoor relief from St. Mary's. She managed for about 2 years after that. Then the building raised the rent, not by much, by 4p a week. 4p when you're already running a deficit is not a small thing. Anne tried subletting, a lodger to share her already inadequate room. But the lodger left after 6 weeks, took her cooking pot with him, and didn't pay his last 2 weeks. After that, Anne went to see Joshua Peake, and Joshua Peake explained what he explains to everyone who has run out of other options. There is the workhouse. You went with her to the gate the morning she went in. You remember the bag she carried, canvas, the handles through her hands, containing her Sunday dress and her Bible, and a small carved box her husband had given her at their marriage, which held a piece of ribbon that had been her mother's. That's what you carry into the workhouse, what fits in a canvas bag. Better to die in the street, she'd said some weeks earlier, but in the end the street was too cold, and the workhouse was at least warm. She turned at the gate and looked at you. You've tried many times to remember her expression precisely, because you've needed it as a preparation. But what comes back isn't one clear expression. It's something more like a settling, the way a face looks when a decision has been made that can't be unmade. "Write to Sarah," she said. "Have someone write if you need to." She meant, don't be stupid about this. Don't wait too long. Then she went through the gate. You haven't seen her since. For 3 weeks after Mrs. Caldwell, you managed. You took in what you could. Handkerchiefs, infant linens, a neighbour's blouses, small things. Your hands made it difficult, not impossible. You soaked them in warm water first, 10 minutes, until the joints loosened enough to function. Then worked slowly, carefully, with the patience of someone who has been doing a difficult thing for 60 years and knows how to accommodate difficulty. You ate less. That was the main adjustment. 1 meal a day, sometimes 2 when the bread voucher had come in. The parish loaf was coarse, second quality grain, bran heavy, dense and slightly gritty between your teeth, but filling. Your body didn't care whether the bread was good. It just needed bread. You drank water and small beer. The well on Vine Court had been, at various points in the past 40 years, contaminated in ways nobody fully understood, giving drinkers what was called, in polite company, the flux. Small beer, very low alcohol, cheaper than most water sources, was at least predictable in its effects. The cold was the real war. Your room in November was the temperature of a church in a deep frost. North-facing window, stone walls that held the cold like a safe holds money. You could afford to burn coal for 2 hours a day, perhaps 3 on the worst nights. You slept in Thomas's coat and your wool dress and the knitted cap that Anne Ridley had given you 3 years ago. One good blanket, one that was more patches than original material, but which served. In the mornings, your hands required 20 minutes before they were functional. You'd lie still, breathing on them, watching the sensation return. Pins first, then ache, then finally the stiff approximate movement of fingers that didn't quite want to cooperate but would, if pressed, do the minimum. Some mornings, lying still with your face against your own breath, you did the mathematics, in the dark, without invitation. 1 shilling 6, parish relief, 1 loaf, 1 shilling 8, rent, 4 pence from the neighbour's infant linens, almost. 1 more week, find something, make it 1 more week. Then the Barton account went. Catherine Barton came to your room on a Tuesday in early December. She stood in the doorway with that week's small bundle of washing. The Bartons were careful people, no excessive laundry, and she looked at your hands. You felt her looking. The swollen joints, the cracks, the way you'd tuck them slightly against your sides as you opened the door. "I'm perfectly capable," you said. "I know you are. Your things would be done by Thursday. I know, Margaret. My sister-in-law has a girl who needs work." A pause. "She's 17. "Of course she is." Catherine Barton pressed a full week's payment into your hand. She paid you for the week she was cancelling, which she didn't have to, which told you something about the quality of the woman. And she said, "I'll ask around. I'll see if anyone on the street has need." "That's very kind," you said. She left. You stood in your room with 1 shilling in your hand. That's the last of the accounts. That's all the income. Gone. 1 shilling 6, parish relief, 1 loaf, 1 shilling 8, rent. The deficit is not 2 pence anymore. The deficit is everything. There was a letter. Mrs. Collins downstairs. Her daughter had some schooling. read it to you. It was from the churchwardens of St. Mary's. You were requested to appear before the Board of Guardians the following Thursday at 10 o'clock to discuss the continuation of your relief. You wore your cleanest dress, which was also your only dress. Thomas's coat on top because it was cold enough to wear it, and let the board think what they liked about that. The vestry meeting room, a long table, 6 men on one side, you in a chair facing the window, the same grey light, the same particular arrangement that makes you feel small without anyone having deliberately arranged it. Joshua Peake, the churchwarden, Mr. Fellows. 4 local tradespeople, a leather worker, a chandler, a flour man named Archer, a man you didn't know. They had a file, your file. They discussed you in the third person even though you were sitting 3 feet away. Archer leaned forward. Is she able-bodied? They all looked at you. You sat very straight. You put your hands on your knees where they could be seen. You did not tuck them away. The flour man, then she's able-bodied. The leather worker, the question is whether the current outdoor relief is sustainable as a long-term arrangement. The parish rates are under considerable pressure. They discussed the winter, the number of able-bodied poor on the rolls, the distinction between the deserving and those whose poverty was, in the board's assessment, a consequence of their own choices. You listened to all of this. You thought about the ringing motion, about the tablecloths in the copper, about the specific weight of wet wool at 5 in the morning on a January Monday. Finally, the churchwarden turned to you directly. Mrs. Holt, you are, as I understand it, still physically capable of some work. Yes, sir. The question before the board is whether to continue your outdoor relief, reduce it, or recommend a place in the parish workhouse, where your needs would be fully provided for. I would prefer outdoor relief, you said. I would prefer to stay in my room. The board's concern is that the current level is not sufficient to cover your rent and your subsistence needs, which means that over time, I'll manage the rent. With respect, Mrs. Holt, you currently have a deficit of, I'll manage it, a silence. The 6 men looked at each other. We will continue outdoor relief for a further 4 weeks, the churchwarden said. At the end of that period, we ask you to appear again. If your situation has deteriorated, we would strongly recommend the indoor option. You stood up. Your knees made their sound. You hoped they couldn't hear it. Thank you, sir. You walked out with your spine straight. You stood outside in the December air and thought, 4 weeks. Find something. Anything. Make it 4 more weeks. The 4 weeks passed. Not easily, but they passed. A woman on Brady Street needed emergency help. Her laundress was ill. 3 days' work, 2 shillings. A public house on Mile End Road, Christmas week, needed an emergency washing done. The laundry of a public house at Christmas is considerable, and it is a particular kind of laundry. Ale-soaked, food-stained, sometimes blood-spotted, always heavy. Your hands shook by the end of each day, but 4 shillings for the week. Small things, irregular, not enough, but something. You managed the rent for 3 of the 4 weeks. The 4th week, you were 3 pence short, and you took the 1 shilling and 5 pence to Mrs. Bellamy, and she looked at you for a long moment and said, I'll note the 3 pence as a debt, Mrs. Holt. You went to bed that night with the 3 pence around your neck like a stone. The second board meeting was briefer. Joshua Peake had been methodical in the intervening weeks. He had confirmed the end of your accounts with Mrs. Caldwell and the Bartons. He had established, through Sarah or through someone sent to Sarah, that she could not provide support. He had noted the rent arrears. The churchwarden said, The board has determined that your current situation cannot be sustained under the outdoor relief arrangement. You looked at him. You didn't say anything. We would like to offer you a place at St. Mary's Workhouse, effective no later than the 24th of January. And my room, you said? Your tenancy would need to be terminated. Mrs. Bellamy has already been informed. Mrs. Bellamy had already been informed. You thought about that. And my things. Personal belongings may be brought. The workhouse has a storage inventory. The coat, you may bring the coat. Your voice was steady. You were proud of that. Yes, you said. All right. 10 days. You spent them looking at what 68 years had accumulated and deciding what could be carried in a canvas bag. The table stayed. The stools stayed. The chest, your mother's, or perhaps her mother's, moved through hands and decades. You couldn't take it. You took what was inside it. Thomas's coat, which you were already wearing. Your Sunday dress. The Bible. Thomas's name written on the front page in a hand that wasn't yours. A set of combs. A wrapped piece of good soap, saved from a Christmas gift 3 years ago. The patched blanket. Anne Ridley's knitted cap. A handkerchief. 2 pairs of stockings, one with a darned heel. That was the canvas bag. You went downstairs to say goodbye to the Collins family. The oldest Collins child, Bess, 12 years old, looked at you with very round eyes, as if you were going somewhere she'd been warned about. Which, in fairness, you were. You stood on Vine Court for a moment in the cold January morning. This alley, its specific stones, the dip near the water pump, the loose edge near the second door, the stretch by the entrance where a cartwheel cracked the paving last spring. 10,000 times you'd walk these stones. More. You knew them without looking. You picked up the canvas bag. You walked out onto Whitechapel High Street. It was still dark, properly dark, the January dark that doesn't lift until well past 8, but the street was alive. The East End doesn't sleep deeply. Market traders setting up along the high street. The woman who sold second-hand shoes. The man with the cheese cart who looked up as you passed. You'd sold him an old coat of Thomas's once. Not this coat, a different one. And he had the recognition of a man who'd seen many people on this street going in many directions. "Morning, Mrs. Holt," he said. "Morning," you said. You kept walking. Past the tallow chandler on Osborne Street, with the rendered fat smell that coated the back of your throat. Past the weaving shop where 4 looms were already going. The mechanical clatter audible from 20 feet. A sound you'd heard your entire life from this street. Past St. Mary's Church itself, where you would go Sunday mornings when your legs cooperated, where Thomas's name was in the burial register, where the bells had rung every hour of every day of your 68 years. Past the place where Thomas used to take off his hat every Sunday, the same spot every week, as if those particular cobblestones were sacred. Past the corner where you first heard his voice. A Tuesday market, 1736. He'd been arguing with a seller about cheese, loud, confident, entirely certain about his position on the cheese question. You'd watched for longer than was necessary. You were 22. You stopped on that corner now. January cold, canvas bag in your hand, the river wind threading through every gap in every building. This was your Whitechapel. Not the Whitechapel of reformers' pamphlets or official parish records. Your Whitechapel, with its specific smells and its particular winter light and the bells of St. Mary's on Sunday mornings, and the woman who sold lavender in summer from her basket. whose name you never learned in 11 years of buying from her. All of it was here. All of it was going to continue being here without you. You walked east toward the workhouse. St. Mary's Workhouse stood on Old Montague Street, 3 stories of London stock brick that had absorbed 40 years of coal smoke and appeared to have decided to simply incorporate it. Small windows set high in the walls, a wooden gate in an arched entrance wide enough for a cart. The gate was open. You stood outside it for a moment. The smell coming through the gate was layered. Boiled vegetables from the kitchen, lye and wet wool from the wash house, which made your hands contract without your deciding to contract them, and beneath those the dense human smell of many people in a confined space, which Thomas would have called, without malice, a pauper smell. The smell of people who don't have quite enough of anything, and never will. You went through the gate. The admissions clerk behind the counter had the incurious efficiency of a man who has processed a great many people through this particular door. Name, Margaret Holt. Age, 68. Marital status, widow. Parish, St. Mary's Whitechapel. He wrote it all down, slowly, with great care. Any medical conditions? You considered. My hands, you said, and my back. Ambulatory? I walked here. He looked up. A small thing crossed his face, perhaps a smile. Yes, he said, I see that you did. Then, possessions, the inventory, standard procedure. When they came to the coat, you said, I'm wearing it. Thomas Holt's coat, my husband's. I'd like to keep it. He looked at the coat. All personal clothing is replaced with workhouse issue upon admission, he said. Your personal clothing will be returned to you if you leave the workhouse. If you leave the workhouse? You took Thomas's coat off. You laid it on the counter. You tried to do this without anything showing on your face. He gave you a receipt. Then he called for someone to show you in. The woman who showed you in was Dorothy, a long-term resident, perhaps 75, thin as a stripped branch, with a face that had moved long ago through all the ordinary emotions into something more deliberate. She'd been here long enough to have small responsibilities. She'd seen enough arrivals to know when to speak and when to let someone be. She gave you the workhouse dress, dark brown wool, rough, the coarsest grade, processed with the minimum. Clean, at least. Clean and rough, and exactly like every other dress in the building. In here, everyone looks the same. The dormitory was on the 2nd floor, a long room running the full width of the building. 23 beds, which were straw mattresses on low wooden frames, separated by 2 feet of space on each side. A coarse wool blanket on each. 2 fireplaces, one at each end, both burning, cold enough to see your breath, but not the cold of Vine Court in December. Dorothy showed you to the middle of the row. Middle's fine, she said. Middle's peaceful. You sat on the edge of the mattress. The straw gave under your weight. Recently restuffed, you could tell by the evenness, the absence of the flat, damp smell of old straw. A small mercy. You sat there without Thomas's coat, in the brown dress that's the same as everyone else's, with a receipt for your belongings in your hand. Dorothy waited. The Bible, you said eventually. In the bag. Could I have it? I know I can't read it, but to have. I'll speak to the matron, she said. That afternoon the matron, Mrs. Grout, competent neither kind nor unkind, allowed you the Bible, the handkerchief, and Anne Ridley's knitted cap. No resale value, not against the rules. You put them under the mattress. The bell rang at 6 in the morning, not a church bell, an internal bell, small and harsh, mounted above the dormitory door. 6 o'clock. Up. The house rules. No talking during meals. No leaving without permission. Morning prayers at 6:30. Breakfast at 7. Work at 8. No contact between male and female residents, except the Sunday courtyard period. Breakfast was stir-about. Oatmeal boiled to paste, no seasoning. Hot. Filling enough to work on. Dinner, bread with thin gruel, sometimes with vegetables, sometimes with what you suspected was vegetable-flavoured water. Supper, bread. Occasionally on a good week, a small portion of salt meat. Twice a week, a slightly thicker soup with bones. The bones were the valuable thing. You could extract a considerable amount from a marrow bone if you treated it with patience. You ate everything. In your last months on Vine Court, 1 meal a day had been normal. The workhouse diet, bad as it was an improvement in the only way that mattered. Your body noticed. Within 2 months, the translucent thinness you developed in your last weeks on outdoor relief began, slowly, to reverse. You were not comfortable. You were not warm exactly. You were not free, but you were being sustained. And sustenance, after everything that came before, was not nothing. They gave you oakum, old rope, cut into lengths, to be pulled apart fibre by fibre. The separated fibres were used to caulk the seams of wooden ships, stuffed into the gaps between planks to keep water out. Simple work, repetitive, and exactly the kind of sustained gripping and pulling that inflamed your knuckles most efficiently. By the end of the first week, your hands were worse than they'd been on the coldest mornings on Vine Court. Mrs. Grout, the matron, noted this. Not from compassion, from productivity. Your damaged hands affected the workhouse's oakum quota, sold the dockyards. She reassigned you, mending instead. Shirts, blouses, the ongoing repair work of various commercial establishments, from which the workhouse earned a small income. Your stitching was not fine work. You were never a needlewoman, but you could stitch a straight seam and darn a worn elbow without making it worse, and this did not destroy your hands the way oakum did. The mending room, a long ground floor room facing the courtyard. 6 or 7 women on stools bent over their work, the silence rule not applying here. A low murmur of conversation, the kind people make when they're doing repetitive work and filling the monotony with something. Martha Saunders, former charwoman, here 5 years. Cheerful in a way that you eventually understood was not cheerfulness, but a decision made early in her residence. A choice to find things interesting, because the alternative was to stop finding things interesting, and that way led somewhere worse. Elizabeth Carr, quiet, stitched faster than anyone, precise fingers that suggested finer work before her eyesight declined. Old Agnes, older than any estimate, mended slowly and occasionally fell asleep over her needle, which the other women accommodated with the practised tolerance of a group that has made its peace with what can't be helped. You learned the sounds of the workhouse without thinking about them. The 6 o'clock bell, the prayers bell, the meals bell, the work bell, the creak of the 3rd floor staircase that meant someone coming down early, the echoing voices from the boys' yard during exercise. You learned the rhythm, not peace, nothing as good as peace, but the rhythm of a place you were beginning to know. There was a man named William Graves. Dorothy told you about him before you'd met him. He'll want to talk to you, she said. He talks to everyone new, especially, she paused, the older ones. He's harmless. Was a printer's devil for most of his life. Since birth, probably, you said. Dorothy's face did the thing you were learning to recognize as her version of a smile. The Sunday common period. A courtyard, stone paved, with a low wall separating the men's section from the women's. Cold, even in pale January sun. People came anyway because dormitories were dull, and dull competed poorly with cold. William Graves was on a bench against the men's side of the wall, small and slightly shrunken in the way of tall men who've begun to draw back into themselves. His face was ink-marked, faint bluish shadows in the lines around his eyes, on the backs of his hands, the kind that no washing ever fully clears from a man who has spent decades near printing presses. Perhaps 75. Alert eyes, the slightly forward lean of someone who considers conversation a primary occupation. He sat on the women's bench, on the other side of the wall. He looked at you. New, he said. January, you confirmed. Margaret Holt, laundress. William Graves, compositor and printer's devil. 47 years. A printer? He held up his hands, the ink shadows. These hands, he said, have set approximately 30 million pieces of type. I have no way to verify that number, but it feels correct. You thought about what your hands had done in equivalent numbers. Every sheet of linen, every tablecloth and woolen blanket and infant clothing and burial shroud. Do you miss it? You asked. A real pause, not polite. Every single day, he said. The smell mainly, ink and machine oil, and the particular smell of a compositing room in winter when the presses are running, the heat of the rollers, the specific sound of type being set, small precise clicks, the sound of language being made physical. He looked at his hands. I set broadsheets, pamphlets, books. Once I set a page of a very bad novel about a wicked lord and a virtuous milkmaid, and I remember thinking, this is terrible, this story, and my hands are making it real for someone to read. A pause. Seems important somehow, that even bad stories get made real with care. You thought about that. 4 years, you said. 4 years. Does it? Mind it? He understood the question before you finished it. The first 6 months. You mind it very much. The noise of other people sleeping, the food. He gestured slightly. The sameness. Every day, the same bell, the same bowl, the same 4 walls. And after 6 months? After 6 months you've made adjustments. The noise becomes background. The food becomes fuel. The sameness becomes... He paused. The rhythm of the place. Not pleasant, but comprehensible. That's not the same as not minding it. No, he said, it's not. The bell rang. Next Sunday, he said, standing with the careful negotiations of someone whose joints require notice. There's more to say. And there was. Week by week, on either side of that low wall, he told you about the press, the broadsheets, the novels, the chapbooks with their terrible woodcut illustrations, and you told him about the wash-house, the lie, the wringing motion, the steam from a well-pressed sheet. You compared, in the specific way of two people who have spent their lives in physical labour, the particular textures and weights and smells of what you'd done. It was not nothing. In a place where connection was not encouraged and every day was the same, William Graves with his printer's ink hands was something real. 3 months in late March, the matron assigned you to window cleaning. A team of 4, working through the building floor by floor. Ground floor, first floor, second floor, buckets and rags and a long-handled brush. On the second floor, south-facing side, the windows looked out over Old Montague Street, and then, beyond it, the rooftops of Whitechapel. You stood at one of these windows with your rag in your hand. An April morning, real spring, that specific April light that London does, the quality of it so different from everything that came before it, that you can feel the city deciding to start again. The trees on the street had that thickened look, bud heavy, not yet fully leaf, but close. The air had a different quality even through the glass, less coal, more river. Below, Whitechapel going about its business, the traffic moving east-west, carts, foot traffic of a busy morning, a woman with a basket walking quickly, the purposeful walk of someone who knows exactly where she's going, a man with a barrow of cloth lengths. You pressed your hand flat against the glass, cold glass, slightly vibrating with street noise. That's my street. Not this building, not this dormitory, not this brown dress, and this morning, and this rag. Whitechapel High Street, where the cheeseman said good morning, where Thomas argued about prices, where the bells rang the same hours they'd always rung. From up here it looked very ordinary, just a street, just people going about their lives. It was exactly that, but it was yours. You cleaned the window for longer than was strictly necessary. Nobody said anything. She came in June, a Quaker by her dress, the plain grey, the white cap, the atmosphere of deliberate simplicity. Perhaps 50. She had the quality of someone who pays real attention, and you know real attention when you see it, because it's rarer than it should be. Most faces, especially faces of authority, are arranged to project something. Competence, sympathy, judgment. This face was arranged to receive. Her name was Eleanor. She was part of a committee of friends who visited workhouses in the East End, not performing charity, actually visiting, stopping and sitting down and listening. She pulled a stool close and sat at your level. "What work did you do?" she asked. "Laundress," you said. 60 years. She looked at your hands. "May I?" You held them out. She held them in hers for a moment. Clean hands, soft, not a mark on them. "Do they still hurt?" "The cold mornings," you said. "Not so much now." "Has being here helped? The food, the warmth?" You thought about it honestly. "Yes," you said. "When I came in, I was running down. The food's helped." "But..." She heard the pause behind the word. "But I had a room," you said. "My room, and my husband's coat, and the street I knew, and the bells through the window. And now I have..." You looked around the mending room. It's better than what I had at the end. I know that." "Better than what you had at the end," she said. "But not better than what you should have had." You looked at her. 60 years of work, she said quietly, should entitle a person to more than this. Nobody had said that to you, not as a fact, not as a simple statement of something owed, rather than an expression of regret for something lost. "There are people working towards something better," she said, not quickly enough. A pause. "Not in time for..." She stopped herself. "Not in time for you." "But eventually," you said. "Eventually," she said. "Yes." She sat with you another 10 minutes. She asked about Thomas, the coal heaving, the lungs, the tin under the floorboard, and she listened with the particular quality of attention that makes you feel the things you're describing are important. When she stood to go, she pressed your hand again. "The work you did," she said. 60 years of laundry. Every tablecloth in every house you washed. Someone sat at a clean table because of you. Someone put their face into clean linen because of you. Someone hosted a dinner with everything pressed and right. You did that. That's real. You thought about that for a long time after she left. Didn't change anything practical. The mending room was still the mending room, but it was something to have it said. To have someone say, "Your work was real, and you did it well." Summer came. The workhouse in summer was not as bad as you'd feared. The cold left the walls. The courtyard held the sun's warmth from midday onward. You and William Graves talked most Sundays. He was working through a memorized inventory of everything he'd ever printed, delivering it with the commitment of a man for whom memory is the last library. "Do you know what a chapbook is?" he asked one Sunday. "I've bought them," you said. "The ones with ballads and stories, almanacs, illustrations, woodcuts, very crude, a penny a copy. I set a story once, a woman in a garden on the cover. I remember because the woodcut woman's face was completely wrong. She looked terrified instead of happy. I pointed this out to the master printer, and he said it didn't matter because nobody looked at the faces. The woman in my picture didn't look terrified, you said. Then it was a different woman in a different garden. Yes. Good. He understood the dead in the way you needed someone to understand them, not with comfort, not with talk of heaven and peace. He received specific things, the cheese argument, the coins in the tin, the coal dust shadows in the creases of Thomas's face, as the specific, irreplaceable things they were. His wife had been a dressmaker, Clara, dead 22 years. You didn't remarry, you said. 47 years is a long time to share a trade with someone. You develop habits. A pause. Also, I was 52 when she died. By that age you know who you are, and you know that who you are is not particularly easy to live with. Thomas was easy to live with, you said. Then you were lucky. I know it. Autumn came. The days shortened. The cold returned to the walls. William Graves developed a cough in October. Not a bad cough at first. The kind autumn gives to people who've been through enough winters that their lungs have developed opinions. But it was a cough, and you knew from Thomas what a cough can become. You watched it. The way you'd watch Thomas's cough, with the precise alertness of someone who knows what they're looking at. In November it worsened. He went to the infirmary for 2 weeks. You sent word through Dorothy. He came back in December, thinner, with a new quality in his breathing. I'm fine, he said. No, you're not. No, he agreed, but I'm better than last month. You looked at him across the wall. Don't die, you said. He looked at you for a moment. I'll do my best, he said. It's all any of us can do. In February, old Agnes died. Quietly, in the night, at a time her neighbours could not pinpoint because she'd been still for so long that stillness was her normal condition. In the morning, Martha Saunders realised. She called the night attendant. Old Agnes was carried out. The workhouse burial procedure was quick. A wooden coffin, the cheapest available, the board still smelling of fresh pine. The workhouse burial ground behind the building, a patch of earth that had been receiving residents for 30 years, the ground slightly raised in places where it had never quite settled over what lay below. No headstone. Custom for paupers' burials, no stone, no marker, just the register, name and date, in a ledger that nobody would read again. A brief service, the chaplain, the women from the mending room, 5 of them in the February cold. Martha stood beside you and cried quietly and steadily, the way people cry when they've decided crying is what's happening and nothing will stop it. Agnes had been here 12 years, best guess. Come in at 72, or what she said was 72. 12 years of the mending room, 10,000 shirts or more, fallen asleep over her needle and been gently woken and fallen asleep again. Her story, wherever she'd come from, whatever work she'd done, was entirely in the register. A name, dates. You stood in the February cold until the service was finished. In the afternoon, Martha stitched without speaking. Then, She was from Surrey originally, a village near Guildford. She walked to London when she was 12, said she remembered the hills, said the hills near Guildford in summer were the greenest thing she'd ever seen. The needle went in, came out. She used to think, someday I'll go back and see those hills. She never went back, you said. She never went back. The mending continued. She said the hills were very green, Martha said again, quietly, as if saying it was the only burial that actually counted. On quiet evenings, when work is done and the dormitory bell hasn't rung yet, there is a half hour that belongs to no one in particular. You sit on the edge of your bed. The dormitory is half lit, candles already out, just the faint glow of the fireplace at the far end. Around you, 23 women in various states of preparation for sleep. The quiet sound of the place settling, the creak of the building, street noise filtering up from Old Montague Street. You take the Bible from under the mattress. You hold it. You find the page with Thomas's name by feel. It's softer than the others, handled more than any other page in the book. The pages around it ever so slightly worn at the corner from the number of times you found your way here. You trace the letters. You don't know what they say. You know what they say, Thomas Holt, the year of your marriage, because you've been told. But you trace them with your fingers because the shape of the letters is the shape of the name, and the name is the same as the man, and the man is still here, somewhere, in a way that has nothing to do with workhouse registers. Outside, the church bells of St. Mary's mark the hour, the same bells you've heard your whole life. They sound the same from here. You knew they would. The dormitory bell rings at 9. Around you the sounds of 23 women settling, straw mattresses taking weight, wool blankets pulled up, the small adjustments of bodies negotiating with the night. You lie back. Your back makes its complaint, a specific angle, a particular negotiation, and you work through it. Right side first, then a careful roll, then flat, hands on chest. Your hands on your chest. You lie in the half dark and you think about those hands. 60 years of lie. 60 years of wet wool and hot iron and cold stone. 60 years of work that will never have a stone placed over it. But those hands, in those 60 years, washed the linen of perhaps 1,000 different people, maybe more. Tablecloths for 10,000 dinners, bed linens for 10,000 nights of sleep, shirts and infant clothing, and the christening gowns of the newborn and the burial shrouds of the dead. All of it came to you dirty and left your hands clean. That is not nothing. Eleanor the Quaker said so. You believe her. The breathing in the dormitory deepens around you. Martha, 2 beds down with her particular sleeping rhythm. Dorothy, who makes no sound in sleep at all. Hannah, the new arrival in old Agnes's bed, who still makes the small sounds of someone who hasn't yet learned to be invisible in the night. You think about William Graves on his side of the wall, his cough, better since Christmas, his 47 years of printer's ink, his dead Clara, who was easy to love apparently, 'cause she was easy to love. You think about Thomas, the coal dust shadows in the creases of his face, the way he'd wash carefully every evening, paying attention to those creases, which never quite came clean, which he accepted with the practicality of a man who knew when a thing was what it was. The way he'd count the coins at the table after supper, not anxiously but thoughtfully. The coins going into the tin or away from it according to the week. The tin under the floorboard. The emergency. He would not have wanted you to be ashamed of where you are. He was a practical man. He would have looked at this dormitory, this warmth, these bells, and said, "It's enough. You've done what there was to do." Outside, the church bells mark an hour you're too tired to count. The same bells, always the same bells. Your hands on your chest. You're warm enough. You are fed enough. You are safe enough. You've worked more than most people who will ever know your name. You worked in ways most people will never understand, in a room that smelled of lye and steam and human effort, and the work was real, and it left the world in better condition than you found it, in the most literal way. That is perhaps the best kind of way. You have loved. You have been loved. You trace the letters of your husband's name in a Bible you can't read, with hands that knew more than your head. That is more than some people get. That is enough. But sleep doesn't come immediately. It rarely does these days. 68 years is a long time to lie awake in, and your mind, which never received the message about slowing down along with your hands and your back and your feet, continues its work with the relentless efficiency of something that hasn't been told to stop. You lie in the dark and your mind goes back. Not painfully, just back, the way a river goes back to its source. Not because it wants to, but because that's the direction gravity runs. You go back to the beginning. You were 8 years old. That is not a metaphor, not an approximation. 8 years old, the autumn of 1722, and you went to the wash house on Bucket Lane with your mother, because you had 3 younger brothers, and your father had been ill since midsummer, and someone needed to be an extra pair of hands. Your mother's name was Elizabeth Warren before she married your father. She was a small, exact woman. Not warm exactly, but not cold either. More like a tool that had been made for a specific purpose, and had found that purpose and was doing it. Purposeful. Her movements in the wash-house had that quality. Not hurried, not slow, precisely calibrated. She'd been doing this since she was 9. She showed you the copper first. The copper was a built-in tub of beaten metal set into a brick surround with a fire space beneath. In the morning before you arrived, the woman who ran the Bucket Lane wash-house, a stout woman named Harper, with 4 arms that could have belonged to a man twice her weight, had already lit the fire. By 7, the water in the copper was hot. By 8, it was properly boiling, the surface rolling, steam sitting above it like a presence. "Don't ever put your hand in," your mother said, not with alarm, as a fact. "The lye goes in here." She showed you the container, a ceramic pot of dark yellowish liquid with the particular acrid smell that would define the next 60 years of your life. The smell of sodium hydroxide, of ash water long steeped, of something that was both cleaning agent and slow damage. It loosens the dirt, helps everything come out. "What does it do to your hands?" Your mother looked at her hands. She turned them over once. "It works on them," she said. "You keep them moving. Keep them out when you don't need them in. Rinse properly after." A pause. "They toughen. They toughen." She was 31 years old when she said that. Her hands were already what yours became at 50, the accelerated arithmetic of lie. You watched her that first day, watched how she lifted the wet linen from the copper using a wooden dolly stick, a long-handled implement for moving fabric through boiling water without touching it, watched how she wrung it at the lip of the tub, the practiced torque of both wrists, the particular way her whole body leaned into it to add weight, watched how she read the fabric with her hands before she let it go into the rinse. "How do you know when it's ready?" you asked. "It tells you," she said. That sounded like nonsense to an 8-year-old. It took 2 years of work to understand what she meant. Another 3 years to do it yourself. Another decade to do it the way she did it. That quality of absolute certainty about fabric, about water, about the relationship between soil and heat and time. By 13, you could do it. By 20, you were as good as she was. She never said so directly. She wasn't that kind of woman. But there was a day, you were perhaps 22, working alongside her at one of the larger establishments on Whitechapel High Street, when you took a difficult piece, a fine cambric handkerchief, with an old stain, set oil by at least 3 months, and you worked it the way you'd worked such things for years, with the particular combination of cool water and gentle heat, and knowing exactly when to try the lie, and exactly when to rinse, and exactly when to simply let time do what force wouldn't. And the stain came out, completely, cleanly, without damage to the fabric. You held it up to the light. Your mother watched from across the room. She said nothing. But she went back to her own work with the expression of a woman who had just confirmed something. That was enough. She died when you were 31, the winter of 1745, a hard one, the kind that got into buildings and didn't leave until April. A cold that started as an ordinary January cough and became something worse over 3 weeks, and then became the thing that took her. She was 54. She had been in the wash house since she was 9. 45 years. You washed her shroud yourself. The best day you can remember is a Tuesday. This is not the kind of thing that makes sense out of context. There were Sundays at St. Mary's, Christmas with Thomas's family when his mother was alive, the day Sarah was born. There were things that ought to have been the best day. But the mind goes where it goes. A Tuesday, 1754. You were 40. Thomas was 52. You'd been married 16 years. The account was a house on Commercial Street. A lawyer's family, good income, regular and considerable laundry. One of your better accounts. The household had a good yard, south-facing, which in July meant proper drying. You'd brought the washing in that morning, spent the full day at their wash-tubs, a set of copper-lined wooden tubs in the outhouse, a good arrangement, better than most. By 4 in the afternoon, every piece was dry. Not merely dry in the way July makes things dry, with heat and a south wind that had come from somewhere warmer still, the smell of it different from London's usual smell. The sheets on the line were moving slightly in that wind, white, pressed already by the sun, smelling of nothing except clean. You pulled them in one by one, the warmth of them in your hands, not the warmth of the iron, not the warmth of the copper, the warmth of the sun, which is different, lighter, as if the heat had come from a direction that hadn't first been through soot and smoke and city. You folded them on the yard table, the sound of them, that quiet whisper of good linen being folded, the edges meeting cleanly, the whole thing submitting to order. Then Thomas appeared at the yard gate. He'd come from the wharves, his coal dark face, his particular way of leaning on the gate-post. "Done?" he said. "Just finishing." "I thought we might—" He tilted his head in the direction of the fields. There were fields east of the city still in those years, where the market gardens ran, where you could walk on a long summer evening and smell something that wasn't Whitechapel. "Give me 10 minutes, you said. You walked for 2 hours, not to anything, not for any purpose, just east, along the lanes between the market gardens, where the beans were in full run, and the smell of green things replaced everything else." Thomas talked about the wharves, the men he worked with, a fight that morning about the unloading sequence that made him laugh telling it. You talked about the lawyer's household, the household's children, the younger one who had looked at you over the fence all day. Nothing happened. No event. Nothing to record. Just a Tuesday in July in 1754, walking east of the city with your husband while the shadows lengthened, while somewhere behind you the sheets you dried in the sun were cool and folded on the lawyer's shelves. You kept a clean house, someone said of you once. You kept a very clean house. You did. That's what you did with 60 years. You kept things clean. February passed. March. William Graves' cough stabilised. Did not improve, but did not worsen. You noted this as a kind of victory and chose not to examine it too closely. You and he talked most Sundays when the weather allowed courtyard time. When it didn't. When February rain drove everyone inside and Sunday exercise meant the long corridor on the ground floor, which the men and women shared but from opposite ends, passing in the middle with the careful inch-apart courtesy of people who hadn't decided yet how close to stand. When it didn't, you didn't see him. Those Sundays were longer, Martha noticed. Martha had sharp eyes behind her decision to be cheerful, a noticing quality that you'd underestimated at first. Your printer, she said, one rainy Sunday, bent over a shirt collar with particular attention. He's not mine. Isn't he? Not a question. He's an old man on the other side of a wall. Yes, Martha said. That's about where we all are. She glanced up. He's good, that's all I mean. It's good to have someone to talk to who's good. You thought about that. Thomas was good, you said. I know. It's not... I know, Martha said again. It doesn't have to be. Good is just good. There's not a lot of it here. She went back to the collar. She was right, of course. There was not a lot of it. The workhouse was not cruel, not in the way that some of them were, not in the way the reformers wrote about in their pamphlets, those who came and observed with notebooks. Mrs. Grout ran a clean house, which was something. The food was inadequate, but not deliberately so. The rules were designed for control, not for punishment, but good. The kind Martha meant, the kind that comes from someone paying real attention to you, from someone who receives the specific things you say, rather than the category you represent. That was rare. William Graves received specific things. He knew Thomas's tin was called the Emergency. He knew your mother's name was Elizabeth. He knew the July sheets on the Commercial Street line warm with sun. He had said 3 weeks ago that the sound you described, the whisper of good linen being folded, was comparable in his experience to the sound of a form of type being locked into the press chase. Small mechanical certainty, the world briefly in order. You were still thinking about that. In April, the matron announced that residents in good health and behaviour who wished to attend Sunday services at St. Mary's, the real St. Mary's, the church on Whitechapel Road, not the workhouse's own brief Wednesday prayers, could apply for permission. The application was a formality, a list of names submitted to Mrs. Grout, who confirmed each person's behaviour record and approved or declined. You applied. Dorothy applied. William Graves applied from the men's section. The Sunday in question was mid-April. Cold enough to want the coat you didn't have, but the kind of cold that made the air taste clean. You and Dorothy were given the workhouse's standard outdoor shawls, heavy wool, dark grey, not the coat but something, and walked out through the iron gate in a group of 8 women, 2 accompanying staff. Whitechapel Road in the morning. You stood on the pavement for a moment before the group moved. The street. Your street. It looked exactly as it always had, which was simultaneously obvious and astonishing. Of course it did. It was 4 months, not 40 years. And you stood in it for a moment and felt it in your chest. The particular quality of standing on unknown ground. The way your feet knew where to put themselves on this pavement, which stones were slightly higher, which gutter ran deeper. Dorothy took your arm. "Come on," she said, not unkindly. You walked. The cheese man was still on his corner. Not the same man, a younger man now, perhaps his son, but the cart was in the same position, and you felt absurdly a gratitude for it. Thank you for being where you were. Thank you for being findable. The church was 7 minutes from the workhouse gate. 7 minutes on these streets, which had been 7 minutes your entire life. St. Mary's White Chapel, built and rebuilt over centuries, the current building largely from 100 years back, grey stone, the tower you'd seen from Vine Court every morning of your adult life. The bells, which you'd been hearing your entire existence, rang as you approached. You went in through the south door. The smell of a church, cold stone and candle tallow, and a very old wood smell from the pews. It was a smell you'd been inside dozens of times, hundreds, but returning to it now had a specific quality. The smell of Sunday. The smell of normal. Your usual pew was 3 rows from the front, left side. You'd sat there with Thomas for 20 years. After Thomas, alone, until the last 2 years when your knees had made the walk unreliable. You sat in it. Just sat. The service began. The vicar, Mr. Selby, a young man who'd come to the parish 2 years ago and preached with the earnest care of someone, still constructing his theology piece by piece. He was not a remarkable preacher. He was sincere and clear and middling, and that was enough. The familiar words washed over you. You didn't think about anything in particular. You just sat in your pew in St. Mary's White Chapel, and the bells rang, and the words came in and out, and the morning light came through the east windows in its particular April slant. Thomas had sat in this pew for the last time 6 years ago. His last service, 3 Sundays before the end. You'd helped him down the aisle, both of you knowing it would be the last time, neither of you saying so. He'd looked at the windows. "Good light," he'd said. That was all. Good light. You looked at the windows now. He was right. It was good light. After the service, the group was given 20 minutes in the churchyard before the return walk. You stood at Thomas's grave. The marker was modest. The tin had not stretched to more than a plain headstone, but it was real. Thomas Holt died 1779, aged 59, beloved husband. The stone was slightly mossy at the base now, doing what stones do in London churchyards, absorbing the damp. You hadn't been here since September. You put your hand on it. Cold stone. London stone. The specific cold of something that has been outside in all weathers. Old Montague Street, you told him. The mending room. A pause. The food is better than the end of Vine Court. I want you to know that. And there's a printer. William Graves. 47 years. He's good. The stone was still. I have your Bible. Under the mattress. The Capan gave me. You looked at the moss at the base of the stone. I kept the coat as long as I could. A robin landed briefly on the wall 6 feet away and left again. That's all right, you said. I know you'd say that's all right. Dorothy appeared at your elbow. Time, she said. Yes. You walked back to the workhouse with the April wind at your back. On the return, you passed the house on Vine Court. Not by design. The route back ran along Vine Court from the Whitechapel Road end. You hadn't thought about it before leaving. The house was the same. Of course it was. 4 stories, brick, The lean toward the building opposite that had been developing since before you were born. A family was going in through the street door, a young woman with a child on her hip, moving with that particular speed of someone who has too much to do. 3rd floor, the window you could see from this angle. Your window! Someone had hung washing out, 2 shirts and what looked like stockings, on your line. Which was your line, which you'd rigged with particular care and had left behind because there was no way to take it. Someone was using your line to dry their shirts. Of course. This was right and reasonable, and the window was no longer your window, and the shirts were drying in the April wind, and none of this was wrong. You walked past without stopping. Dorothy, beside you, didn't say anything. She knew. She'd had her own version of this walk. The iron gate opened. The gate closed. You were back inside. That Sunday evening, in the quiet half-hour before the dormitory bell, you sat on the edge of your bed and thought about what you'd put in a letter to Sarah, if you were writing one. You weren't writing one. Mrs. Collins downstairs had written the last one for you, the week before you came in, but you composed it in your head anyway, the way you'd always composed things. Your mind working through language even without the means to put it on paper. Dear Sarah, I am well enough. The food is enough. The dormitory is warmer than Vine Court in December, which you will understand is something. I went to St. Mary's today. Father's stone is in good condition. The moss is at the base, but not yet over the inscription. I put my hand on it. You know why. There is a woman named Martha, who is determined to be cheerful, and mostly succeeds. There is an old man who is a printer for 47 years. There is Dorothy, who shows people around and doesn't need to say much. I want you to know. You made the right offer. To have me come to you. That was the right thing to say, and I know you meant it, and I know what it would have cost you, all of you, in that space. You're a good daughter, and I have always known it. Tell Joseph I said he's a good man. Don't elaborate on that. He'll know what I mean. I would like you to bring the children when you visit. All 5. It will be loud. And Mrs. Grout will not be entirely pleased. Do it anyway. I want to see the youngest before she's big. I walk past Vine Court today. Someone is using my line. That's all right. I had 60 years in that room. It was mine for 60 years. That's not taken back. I am tired by evening. I've always been tired by evening. That part hasn't changed. I miss the bells through my own window, the exact sound of them from my room. The bells from the workhouse courtyard are the same bells, same church, but a different angle, different between the walls. The sound is the same, but not the same. That's the whole of it, really. Your loving mother, Margaret. You sat with the composed letter in your head. Then the dormitory bell rang. You lay down. The beds around you filled with the sounds of women settling. Tomorrow. Stir about at 7. The mending room at 8. William Graves on Sunday. Enough. He told you about the book of Ezra. Not the biblical one. A printed book, an account of sorts, a pamphlet with that title, set by him in the spring of 1751. He no longer remembered what it contained, only that setting it had been the best week of work he could remember. Clean copy, readable handwriting from the author, every line of type coming together without forcing. There are weeks, he said, where everything runs. The type falls right. The press behaves. The ink is the correct consistency. The whole thing is a mechanical argument that is briefly, for a week, being resolved correctly. The sheets on the line, you said. July wind, south-facing yard. Exactly that. You looked at him across the wall. He was smaller than in October. The cough had taken something from his frame that hadn't returned. But his eyes were the same, that forward-leaning alertness, the quality of a man for whom ideas are still arriving, still worth attending to. "What do you think happens?" you asked. He knew what you meant. He was quiet for a long time. "I think the compositing room goes on without me," he said. "The type gets set. Books get made. Someone else's hands do the work." "That's not what I meant." "No." He looked at the courtyard wall. "I don't know. I've set the Bible 3 times, beginning to end, well, portions. I know the words of it as a physical object, as a collection of type, better than I know it as text, which probably means something." A pause. I hope, that it matters, that the work mattered, that the work stays somehow in what it made. The books in people's hands. "The clean table," he said. "Yes." You thought about that. "Thomas believed in God," you said. Not elaborately, not the way the vicar does it, with the long arguments, just plainly. There was God, and God knew your business, and that was that. "And you?" "I believe Thomas's opinion on most things was sound," you said. He laughed. A real laugh, which cost him a brief cough, which he controlled. "That's the most honest theology I've heard," he said. In May, a woman named Ruth Finch came into the workhouse. She was younger than most of you, 59, which was the age at which poverty without income qualified you for indoor relief under the parish rules. A former dairymaid, then a hawker of small goods, then nothing after her knees made standing for long periods impossible. She came in crying and never quite stopped. Not dramatic crying, not the kind that demands attention, but the persistent, quiet weeping of someone who had not yet found where to put what had happened to her. She'd cry at meals. She'd cry in the mending room over her stitching. At night you could hear her working through it systematically, like something her body needed to do and was going to do regardless of inconvenience. Nobody was unkind. Martha brought her extra bread once when the portions were generous. Dorothy showed her the system with the patience she showed everyone. The matron gave her a week before any work assignment. You sat with her one evening, in the half hour before the bell. She was sitting on her bed, 4 beds from yours, middle of the row, with her hands in her lap and her face doing what it did. You sat on the stool nearby. You didn't say anything consoling. You'd lived long enough to know when consoling was the wrong tool. You said, "What kind of dairy was it?" She looked up. "A small one," she said. Her voice was thick. "Out toward Hackney. My mistress had 4 cows, not a large establishment." "Did you live in?" "For 20 years." She wiped her face without embarrassment. "Then she died and the farm was sold to a nephew who had his own people. You walked out. I walked out. With nothing. With my wages for the month and a character reference." A pause. "Good reference." She said I was honest and careful, which I was. "Then you were," you said. "That's what you were." She looked at you. "It doesn't help much," she said, "being told you were what you were." "No," you agreed. "It doesn't fix anything." You thought about Eleanor the Quaker. But it matters that someone said it, that someone received it, even later, even when it can't help. She was quiet. "My husband left in the 2nd year," she said, not angrily, just as a fact she'd organised into the record some time ago. Said the farm life was too slow. Was it? For him, yes. He wanted something more. She almost smiled. He wanted something more, and I wanted the 4 cows and the dairy smell in winter and knowing what the day was going to be. Nothing wrong with that. He thought there was. He was wrong, you said. She looked at you again. You're very certain, she said. I'm 68, you said. I've earned certainty about a few things. That almost smile again, this time more complete. She went back to her crying eventually, but something in it was different. You went back to your bed. June brought the long evenings. The workhouse had no use for long evenings particularly. The bells rang the same regardless. The meals arrived at the same hours. The mending came and was done and came again. But the light changed. That long English summer light that comes through windows in the late afternoon and turns everything briefly gold, that was available even here. The mending room's west-facing windows caught it. Between 5 and 7 in the evenings, the work was done in a wash of gold light that was simply the light. The same light that was hitting the River Thames and the Tower of St Mary's and the rooftops of Vine Court and the market gardens east of the city, and the fact that it was also hitting this room through these particular windows did not make it lesser. Martha pointed it out once. "Look at that light." Everyone looked. "That's good light," Elizabeth Carr said. "You thought about Thomas. Good light." "Yes," you said. The examination of your hands was a surprise. A physician came to the workhouse in July, a Dr. Armitage connected to the London Hospital on Whitechapel Road, conducting what he called an examination of the health of the resident poor. A charitable endeavour, he explained to Mrs. Grout. Information gathering. He would examine the residents, note their conditions, ask about their working histories. He came to the mending room on a Thursday morning. He was perhaps 40, with a careful face, and the manner of someone trained to receive unpleasant information without showing it. He had a small notebook, a leather case with his instruments. He looked at your hands for a long time. "May I?" He held his hands out. You let him take yours. He examined the joints, pressed gently at each knuckle, pausing when you involuntarily tightened, noting it, checked the range of motion, looked at the skin quality, the depth of the cracks. "Lie?" he said. 60 years, you said. He wrote something. The pain level currently. Manageable. A pause. Less than it was in the winter. The warmth helps. Yes. He asked about the history, the coppers, the ringing, the ironwork. He listened with the quality of attention that meant he was actually noting the information and not simply waiting for it to end. "There is a condition," he said finally, "which is beginning to be observed and recorded. The systemic effect of sustained lye exposure on the joints and the skin. We don't have a formal name for it. We have, historically, had no reason to name it, because the women who suffer it are the same women who are rarely examined by physicians." He paused. "Because physicians are expensive." "Yes," you said. "Your hands, Mrs. Holt, are a very good example of this condition. If I were writing a medical paper, which I may do, your hands are exactly what I would describe. I'm glad to be useful," you said. He looked at you. The careful face shifted slightly. "That wasn't," he began. "I know," you said. "I know it wasn't. I know you're trying to help." You looked at your hands. "The fact is, useful is what my hands have always been. 60 years useful. I'm not offended to have them noticed. Better noticed than not." He looked at your hands for another moment. Then he wrote something else in his notebook. "May I come back?" he said. "To talk more about the working conditions, the wash house, the specific wash houses you used over the years, the materials, the technique. On Mondays," you said. "I don't have a great deal happening on Mondays." This time he did smile. "Mondays then," he said. He came back 3 times. Each time he asked about specific things. The lye preparation, the water sources, the weight categories of different fabrics, the particular demands of different kinds of stains. He asked with the interest of someone building a picture he hadn't previously known he needed. He told you on his third visit what he was actually doing. There is a committee, he said. Reformers mostly. People interested in the conditions of the working poor, specifically the health consequences of particular trades. Chimney boys, of course. Everyone knows about chimney boys. The scavengers and night soil men. Certain kinds of factory work that's coming in now. He paused. But domestic workers are underrepresented in this conversation. Laundresses specifically. There's almost nothing written about the health consequences of sustained lye work over decades. Because we're women, you said. In part. He didn't flinch from it. In part because the consequences are chronic rather than acute. You don't die suddenly of lye exposure the way a chimney boy dies of cancer of the chimney sweep. You develop, over decades, the condition in your hands, the back, the joint deterioration. It's harder to make a case for. And when you make a case, then it might affect the rates of relief. The acknowledgement that certain working conditions produce certain specific injuries that ought to be recognised in the parish relief calculation. He was careful. I'm not promising anything. These things take years. I'm 68, you said. I know. A pause. I'm sorry I can't offer you more. You came here and looked, you said. You wrote it down. You're making it count for something. That's more than most. He came on the fourth Monday with a small gift. A tin of a preparation he said was used by surgeons for cracked skin. He explained how to use it. He said it would help the deeper cracks heal. It did help, actually. Your hands, for the first time in years, hurt slightly less. Small mercy, but real. Summer turned to autumn. The leaves in the workhouse's narrow yard went brown and released. The cold returned to the walls. You began wearing Anne Ridley's cap to bed again, the knitted wool warm over your ears. Your second autumn here. The second time the bells change quality. Summer bells have a different ring than winter bells. Less resonant somehow. The air too warm and moving to hold them the way cold air holds them. Winter bells are clearer, sharper, they travel. You'd known this your whole life without consciously noting it. You noted it now. William Graves's cough did not worsen with the cold as you'd feared. On the first cold Sunday you told him that. He looked mildly affronted. I said I'd do my best. And so you have. Don't be relieved, he said. It's undignified to be relieved about someone else's survival. I'll be whatever I want about it, you said. He looked at you. Yes, he said. All right. Sarah came in October. She came with Joseph and with the two oldest children. The girl of 14, Agnes. Name before you knew about Workhouse Agnes, a small irony. And the boy of 12, Thomas, who had Thomas's eyes and Thomas's way of standing with his hands in his pockets. Mrs. Grote was, as predicted, not entirely pleased, but she had good instincts about what was worth arguing and what wasn't, and a woman of 68 with family visiting did not make the list. The visiting room, a low-ceilinged room on the ground floor, not comfortable but table and chairs, used for this purpose and also, during the week, for the chaplain's occasional interviews with residents. Sarah looked at you for a long moment when she came in. You looked at her. You look better, she said, than the last time. The food's better. You're warm. Reasonably. She sat down and reached across the table and held your hands. Both of them, in both of hers, looking at them. The way Dr. Armitage had looked at them, but warmer. The way a daughter looks at her mother's. Hands. They look a bit better, she said. A physician came. He gave me something. A physician came to the workhouse? He's interested in what lie does to laundresses. I'm a good example. You've always been thorough, Sarah said. Young Thomas was looking around the room with the wide-eyed assessment of a 12-year-old accumulating information without quite having decided what to do with it. You sleep here, he said, on the second floor. With other people? 23 of us. He considered this. Like a ship, he said. Joseph, who had the particular quality of a quiet man who has learned when to contribute, said, He's been reading about ships. Like a ship, you agreed, with worse food. Young Thomas almost smiled. He had Thomas's smile too, that slight reluctant quality, as if smiling was a concession being made. Agnes? You're Sarah's Agnes, not workhouse Agnes, though you'd stopped wincing at the name, sat close to her mother and looked at you with the slightly careful eyes of a 14-year-old girl who's understood that this is a situation requiring careful eyes. Are you all right, grandmother? She said. Direct question. Good girl. I'm all right, you said. It's not where I would have chosen to be, but it's... You thought about the right word. Sufficient, you said. It's sufficient I'm warm and fed and there are decent people here. Agnes nodded, as if accepting the audit. We would have had you, Sarah said quietly. I know. Joe never minded. I know he didn't. You looked at Joseph, who nodded very slightly. I know, but the mathematics don't work, and we both know they don't work, and I would rather be here, which is adequate, than there, which would have been a strain on everyone and on me to see the strain. A pause. This way we visit. This way you come and bring the children and we sit at this table. It's not, Sarah said. No, it's not what it should be. Eleanor told me that. A Quaker woman who visits. She sat right here, not this room, but this sort of place, and she told me 60 years of work should entitle a person to more than this. You looked at your hands on the table. She was right. But this is what there is, and this is all right. They stayed 2 hours. When they left, young Thomas shook your hand very formally. You looked at him. Thomas's eyes, Thomas's hands in pockets. Your grandfather was a coal heaver, you said. I know, he said. He worked harder than any man I ever saw, and he was the most decent person in any room he stood in. You held the boy's gaze. You've got his eyes. Young Thomas looked at you. Something in his face went still and serious. Thank you, he said, with the seriousness of someone who has been given something actual. Sarah cried briefly in the doorway. Joseph patted her shoulder in the particular way of a man who loves his wife and understands that some things need crying and some things need patting, and this was a patting situation. Then they were gone. You sat in the visiting room alone for a moment, in the silence they left behind. Young Thomas's eyes. Still here then. Still here. In November, the matron called you into her office. Mrs. Grout behind her desk, a thin-fingered woman with greyish hair, and a quality of personal order that extended to her surroundings. Papers in exact alignment, a single candlestick at a precise angle. Not a kind face, but not unkind. A face that had made its peace with the requirements of its situation. Mrs. Holt, she said, sit down. She had a document before her. You waited. The Committee of Visitors has made certain recommendations with respect to residents, demonstrating particular aptitude and reliability. She looked at you over the document. Dr. Armitage has also written to the board. His examination of several residents, including yourself, has formed part of a report submitted to the parish guardians recommending certain adjustments to the relief classification. She paused. Mrs. Holt, I am authorised to offer you a small adjustment in your circumstances. There is a role here that requires an experienced, trustworthy woman in the mending room. Effectively what Dorothy does for the dormitory, a senior resident position. It carries a small additional allowance, 3p per week, and slightly modified conditions. 3p per week was not the transformation of anything, but 3p was 3p. What does it involve? You said. Overseeing the mending work, assigning tasks, checking quality, reporting difficulties to me, managing the room during my absences. A pause. You have the experience and, I am told, the manner for it. Who told you that? A slight pause. William Graves requested the appointment of someone of your description in a letter to the board. She said it with the tone of someone presenting a fact and allowing you to draw your own conclusions. His recommendation was taken seriously. You sat with that for a moment. William Graves, 47 years a printer, who had said I'd go back tomorrow, who had set 30 million pieces of type with his ink-marked hands, had written to the board on your behalf. Yes, you said, I'll do it. Good. Mrs. Grout returned to her exact documents. You'll begin on Monday. You told him on Sunday. He was on the bench in the November courtyard, coat wrapped around him, breath visible in the cold air. I know, he said before you could say it. You wrote to the board. I write to all manner of people. It's what printers do. We're constitutionally unable to have an opinion without trying to put it on paper. William! He looked at you. Thank you, you said. He was quiet for a moment, his breath visible. You know what I've been thinking about, he said. The compositing room I worked in my last 10 years, on Fleet Street, good house, serious publisher. The master printer was a man named Fellows, 83 years old when I left, still coming in every morning, still checking every form before it went to press, still capable of finding a wrong fount in a page of type by looking at it for 30 seconds. 83. He died the year after I left, still working the week before. He looked at the courtyard wall. He said once, a good page of type set correctly is a kind of prayer, everything in its place, everything serving its purpose. The reader never sees the work, only what the work makes, which is exactly as it should be. You thought about that. The reader never sees the work, only what the work makes. Every tablecloth, every sheet, every shirt. Every person who put on clean clothing in the morning without thinking about where the cleanliness came from. Every family that sat to dinner with a pressed tablecloth and noticed only the dinner. That was you. That was your work, made visible in everything but itself. That's exactly right, you said. Yes. The November cold settled around you both. Next Sunday, William Graves said, I have more to tell you. About the book of Ezra, actually. I've been thinking about what was in it. You said you didn't remember. I said I didn't remember the content. I've been reconstructing it. 60 years in print. It turns out a great deal comes back if you sit quietly enough with it. He pulled his coat closer. Give me a week. I'll be here, you said. He nodded. Yes, he said. So will I. The bell called you in. You walked back through the gate and across the cold stone of the courtyard, the dormitory, the mending room tomorrow, and your new small authority over it, and the 3p per week that was not a transformation, but was something real. The Bible under the mattress, Thomas's name on the first page, Anne Ridley's cap, the receipt for Thomas's coat folded inside the Bible, where it had been since January. You had been in this place a year. In a year, you had learned its sounds and its rhythms the way you'd learned every other place you'd ever lived. The way the third step on the staircase sounded different in wet weather. The specific quality of the light in the mending room on a clear afternoon, when the west-facing windows got the low sun and everything briefly turned gold. Martha's determination, which was a decision made and kept. Dorothy's particular silence, which was its own form of language. Ruth Finch, who cried less now, who had developed her own version of the decision Martha had made. Dr. Armitage, who came on Mondays, who looked carefully, who wrote things down. Eleanor the Quaker, who said, 60 years should entitle a person to more than this. William Graves, 47 years of ink-marked hands, who set 30 million pieces of type and was still, at 75, arriving at things worth saying. Thomas on his corner, 22 years old, arguing about cheese. Your mother's hands reddened from lye since she was 9. The sheets on the line on a July afternoon in Commercial Street, warm with sun, smelling of nothing but clean. All of it real, all of it still here, in the only way things stay. You are in your bed. The dormitory is dark. 23 women breathing in their particular ways, each of them carrying something through the night that the daytime doesn't give them room for. 23 working lives, 23 sets of hands, 23 versions of the mathematics that never quite added up. But here, warm enough, breathing. You hold Thomas's Bible in both hands. The leather cover worn soft over years of handling, the slight raised pattern of it under your fingertips, the weight of it. Not light, not heavy. The exact weight of something you've been holding for a long time. You don't need to open it to find his name. It's on the first page. You know the exact location of every letter. Outside, the bells of St. Mary's mark an hour. They travel in cold winter air, those bells. They travel clearly, sharply, the way they always have. The same bells you heard from Vine Court, the same bells you heard from this room all year, the same bells your mother heard, and her mother before her, and every woman who ever worked the wash-houses of Whitechapel, and came home at the end of the day and heard the bells marking the hour. Always the same bells. The world changes. You've lived through enough of it to know it changes. And the bells ring. Tomorrow. The mending room. Your room now in a small way. Your responsibility. Your people in it. Your small authority. 3 pence. And William Graves on Sunday with whatever he's recovered from the Book of Ezra. And Martha's determination. And the west-facing windows and their afternoon gold. And all of it, day by day, the same and different, bearable and real. Your hands on the Bible, still capable, different from 60 years ago, from 10 years ago, from the day you dropped the basket in Mrs. Caldwell's wash-house and understood what was changing. But still here, still holding something, always still holding something. Let the sound of the bells carry you, the way they've always carried you, the way they'll carry whoever lies in this room after you, and after them, and after all the ones who come after. The same bells. Some things don't end. Some things just ring on. Let the room soften around you. Let the sounds of the other women breathing slow into something like music. Martha's rhythm, Dorothy's silence. Ruth Finch, breathing steadier now, steadier than she was in June. Let your hands relax on the Bible. You've held it long enough tonight. You've held everything long enough tonight. Let your thoughts slow and settle the way wet linen settles when you lay it flat. All that weight and motion coming to rest, the fibres relaxing, the shape of the thing becoming clear when you stop pulling at it. You are warm enough. You are fed enough. You are among people who see you. You have Thomas's name under your fingers and 60 years of clean linen behind you, and a small authority in a mending room and a printer with ink-marked hands who will have something to say on Sunday. That is more than some get. That is, in the only measurement that matters at the end of a long day and a long life, enough. The bells fade, or you fade. It's the same at this hour. You are Margaret Holt. You were a laundress of Whitechapel for 60 years. You kept things clean, and now you rest. Good night.